The Library of Alexandria. At its height, it held somewhere between 40,000 and 400,000 scrolls. That range alone tells you how much we've lost. Not just the scrolls, the records of the scrolls, the catalogs, the knowledge of what was even there to begin with. It was founded in the 3rd century BC under the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, attached to a larger research institution called the Mouseion, dedicated to the 9 Muses, staffed by some of the most accomplished scholars in the ancient world. Eratosthenes worked there. He calculated the circumference of the earth with a stick and a measurement of shadows and came within a few hundred miles of the correct answer. Hipparchus mapped the stars. These were not minor thinkers sitting in a dusty building. They were the intellectual backbone of the Mediterranean world, and they needed access to every text that existed, so the Ptolemies set out to acquire exactly that. Ships arriving in the harbor at Alexandria were boarded. Any scrolls found on board were confiscated, copied, and sometimes simply never returned. The originals stayed in the library. The owners received the copies. Emissaries were sent across the known world to purchase texts outright. The Ptolemies reportedly borrowed the official Athenian state copies of the plays of Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides, paid an enormous deposit to guarantee they would be returned safely, and then kept them and forfeited the deposit without apparent hesitation. They wanted the originals. The library grew into something that had no precedent anywhere in the ancient world and no equal for centuries. It was the closest thing that had ever existed to a complete record of human thought, all in one place, all accessible to anyone the Ptolemies decided deserved access. Then Julius Caesar arrived in 48 BC. He had been chasing Pompey into Egypt when Pompey was murdered on the shore before Caesar could reach him. Caesar stayed in Alexandria. He became entangled almost immediately in the civil war between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII, sided with Cleopatra, and found himself suddenly besieged in the harbor with an enemy fleet positioned to cut off any escape. He ordered the ships in the harbor set on fire. It was a desperate military calculation with no obvious alternative available to him. The fire spread from the ships to the wharves, from the wharves to the buildings along the harbor front. Plutarch, writing more than a century after the fact, states plainly that the great library burned that day. That account is short on detail and has been disputed by nearly everyone who has studied it since. What actually burned is unclear, and the disagreement among ancient sources is itself part of the problem. The geographer Strabo visited Alexandria around 20 BC, roughly 28 years after Caesar's fire, and he mentions the Mouseion, the research complex to which the library was attached, as still operating. If the entire institution had been destroyed, there would have been nothing worth mentioning. The most widely accepted explanation among modern historians is that what burned in 48 BC was a warehouse near the docks, a storage facility holding scrolls that had been cataloged or were waiting to be processed and shelved. Seneca the Younger, citing a source that no longer exists, puts the number at 40,000 scrolls destroyed in that fire. That is not a small number, but it is not the whole library either, and the evidence strongly suggests the institution kept functioning in the decades that followed. The library survived Caesar. Mark Antony, decades later, reportedly gave Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls from the library at Pergamon to replenish whatever had been lost in the harbor fire. That gift alone indicates the institution was still considered viable and worth replenishing. But the Roman period that followed was not generous to it. Funding dried up over generations. The scholarly appointments that had once drawn the finest minds in the Mediterranean world went unfilled or were reduced. The Mouseion's active scholarly membership appears to have essentially ceased by the 260s AD. No single fire, no siege, no order from above, just institutional decay, decades of budget neglect, and a slow drift toward irrelevance as Rome's attention and money moved in other directions entirely. By the 4th century, a daughter collection had been established inside the Serapeum, the great temple complex in the city dedicated to the god Serapis. A substantial portion of what remained of the original Ptolemaic collection had been moved there. Then in 391 AD, the Emperor Theodosius I outlawed pagan religious practice across the Roman Empire. In Alexandria, Bishop Theophilus supervised the demolition of the old Mithraeum. The pagan scholars and philosophers attached to the Serapeum responded with violence. They took up arms, led their students and followers in coordinated attacks on the Christian population of Alexandria, killed people in the streets before being finally forced to retreat back inside the temple complex. The Christians came back in overwhelming numbers. They dismantled the Serapeum. The daughter library inside it went with it. Whatever remained of the physical collection that had once defined Ptolemaic Alexandria burned or was scattered across the city in 391. Hypatia was murdered in 415 AD. She was a mathematician, an astronomer, a philosopher, and the last genuinely prominent scholar associated with the intellectual tradition the library had sustained. A Christian mob dragged her from her carriage in the streets of Alexandria and killed her. That event is often cited as a symbolic endpoint, the final extinguishing of whatever intellectual continuity had survived the library's long, slow decline. Whether or not that framing holds up under scrutiny is worth debating, but the timing is not coincidental. The world that had produced Eratosthenes and Hipparchus and sheltered them and funded their work was, by any meaningful measure, gone. Then there is the story of the Arab conquest. In 642 AD, the Arab general Amr ibn al-As took Alexandria. Several centuries later, Arabic sources described what allegedly happened to the library. The Caliph Umar, so the story goes, was informed of the library's existence and asked what should be done with it. His answer, as recorded by the bishop Bar Hebraeus in the 13th century, was precise. If the books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree with the Quran, they are heretical. Either way, burn them. The books, the story continues, were then used to fuel the fires heating Alexandria's public baths, and it took 6 entire months to get through all of them. That story is a fabrication. Modern scholars are effectively unanimous on this. The earliest written version of it does not appear until the 12th century, more than 500 years after the Arab conquest of Alexandria in 642. Edward Gibbon dismissed it as invented in the 18th century. 20th century historians confirmed his skepticism with considerably more textual evidence. For 5 full centuries after the Arab conquest, not a single Arab, Greek, Coptic, or Egyptian source mentions any destruction of a library by the conquering army. The story appears to have been constructed, most likely to justify Sultan Saladin's destruction of a separate book collection in Cairo in the 12th century, and then projected backward onto the Arab conquest of Alexandria to give it ancient weight and historical authority it never actually possessed. The library did not burn in a single afternoon. It did not fall to one general or one bishop or one caliph with a convenient theological argument. It accumulated losses across roughly 700 years. Caesar's harbor fire in 48 BC destroyed a warehouse near the docks. Roman neglect turned the Mouseion into a hollow institution that retained the name without the substance. The Serapeum's destruction in 391 erased whatever remained of the physical collection. Hypatia's murder in 415 ended the human lineage that had carried the institution's scholarly tradition forward through every previous crisis. By the time the Arab army arrived in 642, there was, by almost every serious scholarly account, nothing significant left to destroy. The most consequential library the ancient world ever produced did not end with a catastrophe visible enough to record. It ended with centuries of quiet neglect, and by the time anyone thought to place the blame, the truth of what had actually happened had already been gone for longer than anyone could clearly remember.